Okay, we're halfway there. See what we can do. Alright, with the death penalty. Okay, so let's just start with it. The English Bill of Rights first banned cruel and unusual punishment in response to the rack and other forms of torture. So, the question is the Eighth Amendment going to disqualify the death penalty? In the late 1800s, England set the tradition of saying, well, certain sorts of things are out of bounds and there's such thing as cruel and unusual punishment. That's what we're saying with the English Bill of Rights. That was in 1688. All right, in the late 1800s, the courts ruled that the death penalty was not cruel and unusual punishment. It didn't violate the Eighth Amendment. And, of course, there were death penalties at the time of the writing of the Constitution. You see that support for the death penalty hit an all-time high late 80s, early to mid 90s. But then as crime went down, support for the death penalty has decreased and opposition to it has increased pretty steadily. I believe there's a little bump for the death penalty the last couple of years. But that's just kind of the direction that public opinion has taken. Okay, the NAACP is a big part of this. Remember, the NAACP uses the courts to make its case, and so both of the death penalty Supreme Court cases come out of Georgia. Now, Georgia and Alabama have a lot of death penalties. Nobody compares to Texas. If you look at a map of death penalties, Texas death penalty the last 20 years equals or exceeds the whole rest of the country combined. But the NAACP successfully argued in Furman versus Georgia that the death penalty was discriminatory. In other words, you take a white and a black convict, both convicted of the same crime, and the African American convict is more likely to get the death penalty. And so in the 70s, after Furman versus Georgia, the death penalty was suspended for a few years. So then in Gregg versus Georgia, the court ruled that the states could bring back a non-discriminatory death penalty. In other words, the statute have to show that no race was more or less likely to get the death penalty than another race was. And so since then, about 2/3 of the states have reenacted a death penalty. Okay. Early in the 2000s, the governor of Illinois suspended the death penalty. His concern was wrongful convictions. And in y'all's lifetime, DNA has been used in murder convictions, and in fairly recent years, the California governor suspended the death penalty. Okay. Anything else to say about the death penalty? Good gracious. All right, late at night and I'm tired, and the extra words are not coming. What are the things to be said about the death penalty if somebody's for? I think we've said it before. If somebody's for the death penalty, they've got to account for these wrongful convictions. What was it? Simple Justice has a movie about the death penalty. It was a capital murder case in the 80s. It's really good. And there's a group fights against death penalty cases. They got highlighted by that, and I might send you the 60 minutes from that movie. It's about an Alabama death penalty case. And of course, and I'm against the death penalty. Here's what I said this morning in the tape that did not take. There's a guy I went to grad school with, and I think he's the guy who maybe persuaded me on abortion by what he said about the death penalty. He said he was life. Consistently pro-life. He was against the death penalty. He was against abortion. All right. And so most folks are kind of inconsistent. They're either, one or the other. Of course, some folks are in favor of death and being pro-abortion and pro-death penalty, but a lot of times you kind of have a mismatch there, and I think maybe he persuaded me on that. Um, so if you were to ask me the question to ask somebody who's against the death penalty, you'd say, well, Mackenzie, what if it was a member of your family? What if it was your parents? What if it was one of your kids? What if it was your wife? Well, I want to kill them with my bare hands and kill them again and kill them again, bring back to life, kill them again, kill them slow, all that, yeah, I'd want to kill them. But, that's why we got laws. I wouldn't be as good as the Amish I don't think I'd be near as good as the Amish or the folks at the Charleston Mother Emanuel AME Church or, Gandhi, any of the people that we saw forgiven people. I wouldn't be forgiven like that. I'd want to do serious pain to them, then kill them. But again, that's why we have laws. So the principle of whether or not the government ought to be killing people outside of war is a separate question from what I would want to be done to somebody who killed a member of my family. Absolutely. I want to kill them and kill them and kill them and kill them. However, all right. Okay. So there's the questions. Okay, so then you got the Second Amendment. Good gracious. All right, so there's what the Second Amendment says. All right, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So, this is written, you take a look at it, this is referenced in Lexington and Concord, right? The Minutemen, we're trying to stop the British from coming to get the guns at Concord. All right, so then does that phrase right there mean that an individual has a right to an assault weapon? All right, does it or does it not? All right, and when you answer the question, ask yourself, do you sound like an originalist? Or do you sound like an activist in this case? Because my conservatives who are going to be big on gun rights, looks to me like they're going to be saying, well, it seems to imply that an individual has a right to bear arms. And then the liberals on the death penalty are going to say, well, look at the words, and it doesn't say an individual, therefore it must not mean an individual. So we kind of flip-flop on this one. In our originalism, in our activism, looks to me like. All right, but originally protected the militia's rights. There was a militia in the Revolutionary War. There was a militia in the War of 1812. Fought terribly in the War of 1812, so there hadn't been militias since then. So, the question is, does it apply to individuals or not? Okay, so then we look at, this story is a really interesting story. Then we look at the National Firearms Act, 1934. All right, and it outlaws sawed-off shotguns that were used by hitmen, basically, and this guy must be Miller right here. All right, they've got the mafia on their mind. The 20s was when, Al Capone was doing his thing, and the Firearms Act is being passed at about the same time that Prohibition is being ended. I believe Prohibition was ended in 1933. Now you've got this gun control law in 1934. All right, so one thing, and so the court case said, yeah, it's okay for Congress to outlaw sawed-off shotguns. All right, so in the general question, if I was to ask you, do you have a right to a BB gun? Well, sure you do. Do you have the right to a nuclear weapon? Well, no. All right. So what you have a right to, the cutoff point is somewhere between BB gun and nuclear weapon. And so then you kind of go case by case and decide, all right, do you have the right to a hunting rifle? I think everyone would say yes, most people. All right, do you have the right to a handgun? It's not going to be used for hunting. We're going to take a look at that in a second. Do you have the right to an assault weapon? All right, but sawed-off shotguns were out of bounds, and the Supreme Court said sawed-off shotguns are guns that individuals do not have the right to. Okay. So then you get Reagan and gun control, and this is just a fascinating story, and Reagan's a fascinating politician. I haven't read the book about Reagan that satisfies me yet. But let's take a look at this. The first gun control laws, these first gun control laws have nothing to do with Reagan. But the first gun control laws were slave codes. So in other words, the first people in favor of gun control were these right-wing, reactionary slave owners or hardcore segregationists. And the liberal position on gun control was that it was bad, because African Americans ought to be able to have guns to protect themselves too. That's the original. So in other words, once upon a time, as it often was the case, our positions were exactly flipped. Okay, and then you see quite an evolution of flip-flopping, really, with Reagan. All right, so California Governor Reagan signed a gun control, one of our first gun control bills in the country in California, because he was concerned about the militant civil rights group, the Black Panthers, coming to the California State House with these big, impressive guns. And conservatives introduced gun control. Conservative Republicans introduced gun control legislation in California because they're concerned about the Black Panthers. Black Panthers were concerned about the police and were into self-defense. Okay. Then Reagan becomes president. The NRA backs him, and so he's pro-NRA. And I'll send it to you. I will try to send it to you. And it's a little speech he's making to the NRA, and he says, what's the NRA line? Something like, he says something like, now I know a little something about guns, and everybody laughs because they know, that he got shot. And he says, but guns don't kill people, people kill people, something like that. All right, and he gets a big standing ovation. So as president, he is a pro-Second Amendment president. All right. And then, when he's former president, he supports the Brady Bill. So there's Clinton signing the Brady Bill. The Brady Bill banned assault weapons and put a put a background check requirement and a waiting period before you could buy a gun. It was signed in 93, 94, something like that. All right, and so Jim Brady was Reagan's press secretary. If you go up to the slide before that, I think that's him right there. May not be, but he got shot when Hinckley, who was trying to impress the actress Jodie Foster, who was in Taxi Driver, that was about an alienated Vietnam veteran. Hinckley shot Reagan. He shot several people. I think he killed some people. I think somebody died. But the press secretary was paralyzed. I guess maybe he had a stroke. As a result of it, he was paralyzed on one side of his body. You can kind of see that. And he was in a wheelchair the rest of his life. So you see Clinton kind of doing the bipartisan thing. He's naming the Brady Bill after a Republican, Reagan's press secretary. And Reagan, I'm going to send it to you. He's going to say, hey, I believe people ought to be able to go hunting, but there's no need for an AK-47 when you go hunting, for an assault weapon. And so, the thing he says could have come straight out of Barack Obama's mouth. He wrote an op-ed in the New York Times supporting the Brady Bill. And so it passed, and the Brady Bill was in place from 1993 to 2003, or something like that. In my own life, I've been inconsistent on it. I supported the Brady Bill, and I still, I support. I love you and everything, my Republican students, but I don't have any sympathy for your. I don't feel sorry for you that you can't have an assault weapon if you had ever had them taken away. I want you to be able to go hunting, defend your house, yada yada yada. I don't think you need an assault weapon. And I don't think taking away your assault weapon is the first step towards taking away all the rest of the guns. When we took that first step, we took that step for 10 years, and then we gave those guns back. Right? We stepped the other direction. Now, having said that, there's an element of hypocrisy here. So you remember the story I told you last year, back in the fall. So we'll rehearse it right quick. A crazy man came over to my house and hit me. And I'd become a vegetarian, and I weighed like 170 pounds, had lost 20 pounds coming out of grad school, was nice and whippy. And he whooped my butt. I'd use a stronger word, but I've stopped cussing for Lent. So then, I started eating meat again and put weight on and got my bench press up to 315 pounds and was ready for him the next time he came over. And so I told the story of, I hit him a bunch of times. All right. I had a baseball bat by the door if he had gotten in. But Miss McKenzie, who was pregnant with Molly, had a gun in her hand. All right. We went over to Miss McKenzie's stepfather's house. He's a Vietnam veteran, and he just gave us a gun. I wasn't going to wait around for the background check. I was thinking that this crazy guy who thought I'd bugged his brain and was listening to his thoughts was awaiting trial for trying to kill me. He was out on bail, as I recall, and he's my next door neighbor. So yeah, we're living next door to this guy who's tried to kill me with a butcher knife. And so it all gets convoluted in my head. It's amazing how much we're able to forget. But at any rate, we were concerned for our safety, so we did not wait for a background check. And so my question is, did I break the law in getting that gun? Now, several of my gun-owning students over the years have told me that it's legal to borrow a gun that has been legally purchased. And so the handgun that he had wasn't an illegal handgun. He had bought it, I guess, at a gun show. So I don't think I broke the law. But when push came to shove in my own life, I was ready to get a gun. That was not an assault weapon, it was a handgun. All right. After we had our situation, I got a shotgun, and we had a shotgun in the house till the McKenzie kids came along. And, the research says that majority of deaths, gun-related deaths, are done in the house by somebody who knows somebody else there. It's not a break-in situation. We've had a situation, a tragedy at Calhoun High School along those lines a few years back. Okay, so there you go. That was my story of my illegal handgun right there. All right, can I get rid of that? What happens if I hit exit right here? There we go. Stop it. Okay, well, let's let it come back up, and there's that stupid thing. I apologize. All right, so here we go. We got two court cases that have incorporated the Second Amendment. So Parker versus D.C. Parker sued Washington, D.C., which is not in a state. So the Supreme Court, Washington, D.C. had a ban on handguns. Washington, D.C. has a high crime rate. It's a pretty tough city. And so the Supreme Court, early 2000s, declared Washington, D.C.'s ban on handguns to be unconstitutional. So then the question was, did that mean that the court had incorporated the Second Amendment to apply to states? And the answer was no, not yet, because Washington, D.C. is not in a state. But then you got a guy, African-American guy by the name of McDonald. There he is in his Chicago World Champions hat, who sues the city of Chicago and his handgun ban. And it was a 5-4 vote. But the Supreme Court ruled that Chicago's handgun ban was unconstitutional. There's a mayor of Chicago saying, hey, I'm afraid crime's going to go up in Chicago. Crime is very high in Chicago. It's called Chirac because the murder rate in Chicago is higher than the murder rate in Baghdad, Iraq. Um, but that's the state of things. The Second Amendment has been incorporated to apply to the states. The Supreme Court has ruled that there's an individual right to own a handgun. It is not ruled on whether or not there's an individual right to an assault weapon. In order for it to do that, there would have to be, somebody have to, there's states with bans on assault weapons, so a state law could make it to the Supreme Court. All right. Anything else we want to say about that? Well, let's just talk about crime for a second. Crime was way up in the 60s and 70s. Still up in the 80s. Started going down mid 90s. So then there's a number of explanations for it. So explanation number one: hey, gun control laws. All right, started going down in the mid 90s after the Brady Bill was passed. Also, Clinton passed 3 strikes and you're outlaws, and Reagan had passed get tough on crime laws before then. So conservatives would say, I'm kind of an all of the above kind of guy. Conservatives would say, hey, it's putting criminals in prison for a long time. I'd say that probably had something to do with it. Liberals would say, hey, there was gun control. I'd say that probably had something to do with it. My favorite explanation over the years has been demographics. That baby boomers were young men in the late 60s, early 70s, when crime's going up. As baby boomers have aged, crime's gone down, and the population of young men is lower in subsequent generations. So that was kind of my explanation. All right, well, I read this book called Freakonomics over Christmas. And these economists had looked at all these explanations. Economists pride themselves on being kind of dispassionate and not getting their emotions into it. And so they went through all the different explanations that I just gave you and a few more that people had talked about. And by the way, I forgot to say this. Like, crime went up into like the early to mid 90s, and the experts all the criminologists said, you're fixing to have this crime wave. Crime is going to be out of control. You've never seen anything like the crime that the United States is about to have. And then just the opposite, they were all wrong. The bottom dropped out of crime. Bottom dropped out of the murder rate. So I mean, we can be hopeful about that. We won't see as many cases of coronavirus as we're afraid we're going to. Just because the experts say it doesn't mean it's true. The experts got it wrong here. All right, so why did they get it wrong, and why did crime go down so much? And so get ready, I'm going to pause for like suspense. Why, according to the authors of Freakonomics? Now, you don't have to agree with what Freakonomics says, but I just want to make you aware of this argument. They said it was abortion. They said Roe versus Wade. Roe versus Wade is 1973. They said the type of person likely to get abortion is a poor mother, impoverished mother. So you're going to have a bunch of, were it not for Roe versus Wade, you have a bunch of unwanted, young, impoverished men who probably would have committed a bunch of crimes. And so they attribute the drop in crime to legalize abortion when, someone who was born in 1973 would have been, 17 years old in 1990. So at the age all those people would have been unwanted young men would have been committed crimes is when the crime rate went down. So that's their argument. Now, two things can be true. It may be true that Roe versus Wade decreased crime, and decreasing crime is a good thing. Doesn't mean that abortion's a good thing. That doesn't change my position on abortion. But, my pro-choice students can take heart. And let's just all just kind of take note that, all this stuff has lots of shades of gray. And so there, that's just a really, really complicated question. All right. Let's take a look right there. All right, let's see. I bet it's about, what do y'all think? I bet this one was about 30 minutes.